The man who lived on $30K a year and died with $8 million. The Ronald Read story. Picture a small Vermont town in the winter of 2014. A lawyer walks into a local bank, asks to open a safe deposit box, and inside finds a stack of papers so thick, nearly 5 inches, that she has to call someone over just to help her carry it. Those papers are stock certificates, dozens of them, blue-chip companies, some held for 40 years, and they belong to a man most people in town knew only as the quiet janitor who drove a beat-up Toyota and pinned his coat shut with safety pins because he didn't want to spend money on a new one. His name was Ronald James Read, and by the time he died at 92 years old, he was worth nearly $8 million, almost none of which anyone around him had any idea about. This is not a story about luck. It's not a story about a secret inheritance or a tech stock that happened to 10x. It's a story about something much rarer and honestly much harder to replicate. A man who understood at a deep and intuitive level what money actually is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Before we get to the $8 million, we need to go back to the beginning, because where Ronald Read started is the whole point. He was born on October 23, 1921, in Dummerston, Vermont. Not a suburb of somewhere interesting, not a town with opportunity around every corner, a farm. A rural, working-class farm where money was tight and the future was uncertain. Ronald was the first person in his entire family to graduate high school. To get there, he walked, or hitched rides, 4 miles each way, every single day. Not because he was building character for a memoir someday, because that was just what you did. He served in World War II, came back, settled in Brattleboro, Vermont, and took a job at a gas station, the Haviland station, where he would work for roughly 25 years. Then he moved to JCPenney, where he worked as a janitor for another 17 years until 1997. At that point, he was 76 years old. He had spent his entire working life in jobs that most people would describe as modest at best, invisible at worst. And yet, here is the thing that most financial biographies get wrong about Ronald Read. They treat his frugality as the story. The tattered coat, the used car, the firewood he kept splitting himself well into his 90s. Those details are real and they matter, but they are not the story. They are the visible surface of something happening underneath, something behavioral, something psychological. Because Ronald Read was not just cheap, he was intentional. There is a distinction that most people in their 20s and 30s and 40s miss completely, and it costs them everything. The distinction is this: income is not wealth. A person earning $200,000 a year who spends $200,000 a year has a net worth of 0. A person earning $30,000 who spends 20 and invests 10 is quietly building something that will compound for decades. We live in a culture that has completely collapsed this distinction. We signal wealth through spending: the car in the driveway, the vacation on Instagram, the restaurant on a Tuesday. And that's not judgment, it's behavioral science. We are wired to respond to social signals of status. The problem is that the people doing the most visible status signaling are often the ones with the least actual wealth underneath it. Meanwhile, the people building real, lasting wealth often look like nobody. They look like Ronald Read.
He taught himself to invest, not with a broker, not with a financial advisor who charged fees and recommended products. He borrowed books from the local library in Brattleboro, a library that because of him would one day receive $1.2 million. He read the Wall Street Journal. He read Barron's. He built a system quietly over decades that was almost comically simple. He bought dividend-paying blue-chip stocks, companies that made things people needed: Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Colgate-Palmolive, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, American Express, General Electric. He understood what these companies did. He could explain their businesses in plain English. And when he bought them, he held them. Not for a quarter, not until something better came along, for decades. He reinvested every dividend. Every dollar the stocks paid him, he put straight back in. He never chased technology stocks, never followed hot trends, never let FOMO, the fear of missing out, drag him into something he didn't understand. When the dot-com bubble inflated in the late 90s, Read was in his late 70s, still reading Barron's and holding Colgate-Palmolive. He did hold Lehman Brothers. When Lehman collapsed in 2008, that position went to 0. Ronald Read was not perfect. But here is what a diversified portfolio of quality companies does: it absorbs failure. 1 0 in a portfolio of 95 well-chosen positions is a lesson, not a catastrophe. Most retail investors panic and sell everything. Read, at 86 years old, likely barely flinched. Now here is a behavioral detail that sounds almost trivial, but is actually one of the most important parts of this story. Ronald Read kept his stock certificates in a physical safe deposit box, actual paper. Not a brokerage app on his phone, not a portfolio he could check 17 times a day, paper in a box at a bank that required him to physically go there to do anything at all. That friction was a feature, not a flaw. One of the most consistent findings in behavioral finance is that the investors who trade the most frequently perform the worst, not because they're stupid, because they're human. We respond to volatility. When markets drop and our portfolio is a red number on a screen, every instinct says sell. The people who built great wealth over long periods often did it by making it structurally difficult to panic. Ronald Read's solution was to own paper. The distance between the impulse and the action was long enough that the impulse would pass. He also had something rarer than a good investment strategy. He had a concept of enough. This is where the psychology gets interesting. Most people who accumulate wealth, whether through income, inheritance, or investment, adjust their lifestyle upward to match it. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it is almost automatic. You get a raise, and 6 months later, the raise is gone into a nicer apartment or a better car. You don't feel richer because you aren't. You just moved your spending floor up. Ronald Read's floor never moved. He lived the same way at 80 that he lived at 40. He did not feel deprived, at least not in any way he ever expressed to people who knew him. A friend of his once said that if Read made $50 in a week, he probably invested 40 of it.
Think about what that actually means over time. If you invest roughly $300 a month, which is close to what Read's savings rate would suggest, and you earn an 8% annual return on average, and you do it for 65 years, you end up with approximately $8 million. The math is not magic. It is compounding, and compounding's only non-negotiable requirement is time. Not intelligence, not a high income, not a financial advisor. Time. Patience. Decades. Ronald Read had all of those because he was never in a hurry to be rich. He wasn't trying to get there fast. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just quietly converting his labor, modest, unglamorous labor, into ownership, one dividend-paying stock at a time, for most of his adult life. He died on June 2nd, 2014. His estate was valued at just under $8 million. He left $4.8 million to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. He left $1.2 million to the Brooks Memorial Library, a library whose entire operating budget at the time was $600,000. His gift to that library was twice what they spent in an entire year. He gave $2 million to stepchildren, caregivers, and friends. The man who never told anyone he was wealthy made sure, at the end, that the institutions that had quietly served his community for decades could keep doing it. Morgan Housel, in his book, The Psychology of Money, uses Ronald Read as the central example of what wealth behavior actually looks like. Not wealth strategy, wealth behavior. Because what Read had was not a sophisticated financial plan. It was a set of behaviors repeated daily and weekly and annually for 6 decades that compounded into something extraordinary. Patience, consistency, a complete indifference to what anyone else thought of his lifestyle, an understanding that wealth is not what you show, it is what you keep and what you grow. Here's the uncomfortable question that Ronald Read's story leaves you with. Not, why wasn't he famous? Or, how did no one know? The real question is, what are the behaviors you practice every day that are either building towards something or quietly eating away at it? Because the man in the tattered coat with the safety pins wasn't waiting for a better salary or a market tip or the right moment. He was in Brattleboro, Vermont, reading library books and reinvesting dividends while the rest of the world wasn't watching. And that invisibility, that was the whole strategy. If this story made you think differently about money, about what wealth actually